me go ahead and start off by first of all welcoming everybody to the WIRE's Spring 2023 meeting here in Charleston, South Carolina. We've got a fantastic venue and a great turnout for our meeting, and we have a phenomenal keynote speaker, and we've got some great panels lined up for this session. But to start the whole event off, we have a welcome message from Congressman James Clyburn, who's the representative for this district. So it's a pre-recorded video message, but I'll go ahead and play his welcome for the WIRE's group here. If I can just figure out how to operate this system.
Hello, I'm Congressman Jim Clyburn. It is my honor to help welcome you to the WIRE's annual spring meeting. WIRE's is becoming a leader in developing effective transmission solutions for our increasingly electrified economy, and I'm proud to support your important work. I want to begin by thanking the WIRE's Board of Directors and officers, especially the WIRE's Executive Director, Larry Gastiger. This gathering today of the country's leading transmission companies and organizations wouldn't be possible without their leadership on this critical issue. When Congress passed the Infrastructure Bill and Inflation Reduction Act last year, we made historic investments in clean energy technologies that will set forth a new era of American innovation and drastically reduce our emissions. New incentives will make electric vehicles and appliances more affordable and jumpstart the United States manufacturing of solar panels, wind turbines, and energy storage technology, and accelerate the deployment of clean sources of electricity across the country. However, this legislation on its own is not enough. To maximize the investments we make, we must also invest in updating our nation's transmission lines. We must increase the capacity of our electric grid to handle the influx of new clean electricity generation, as well as to match energy generation from places of peak supply to places of peak demand. This will require policymakers, regulators, and industry groups to coordinate and develop a national strategy that removes barriers to interregional transmission development and streamlines the permitting process. Additionally, we must also be diligent in ensuring new investments in transmission lines are shared equitably across communities. The Inflation Reduction Act will go a long way to help lower income communities gain access to affordable, clean energy sources and energy efficiency technologies. It's essential that transmission and investments share the same concern for these communities. This is especially important since lower income communities have historically carried the costs of large-scale infrastructure investments without receiving much of the benefits. As our country builds out the long-distance transmission lines needed for a more resilient and clean future, we must make sure communities that are affected are included in the planning process and the benefits are equitably distributed. In Congress, I will continue seeking consensus on reforms that will pave the way for transmission infrastructure that supports the investments we have already made. I know how important increasing access to clean energy and grid resiliency is for my district and for our country. And so, I'm committed to addressing the economic, environmental, and coordination challenges that stand in the way of progress. Your expertise will be tremendous resources in helping guide regulators and policymakers in solving these issues. I urge your continued participation in the legislative process so that we can work together to address one of the most important challenges of our time. Together, we can build a clean, resilient, and equitable grid that will power America's economy for the 21st century. Thank you, good luck, and Godspeed.
Well, I'd like to just thank the congressman and his staff who really worked hard to get this together when there's a few other things going on in DC besides doing this type of a thing, so I really appreciate the effort. And I couldn't have put it better myself in terms of his messaging. It syncs up great with some of the programming we have for you here today. I'm actually also really impressed that he managed to get the pronunciation of my last name right, which is no small feat for anyone to try to take on. So with that, we're ready to go ahead and move forward with our programming. We've got a phenomenal keynote speaker, and President Stacey Burbury for the Wires Group is going to come up and do the introduction for our keynote speaker. So Stacey, I'll let you take it over.
Good morning. I'm Stacey Burbury with American Electric Power, the current president of Wires, and it is my distinct pleasure and privilege to introduce Chairman Willie Phillips to this group, who is well known to this group, I should say. In his first speaking engagement after joining the commission, Chairman Phillips said, "I think we need to be really serious about reliability. I think we have a wake-up call right now. And I believe that transmission development, transmission build-out can be a huge part in addressing reliability and resilience." And those words ring true as well today as they did then. Today's panels on ESJ and interregional transmission reflect some of the top priorities of the chairman and underscore the important policy reforms that are needed to move us to the grid of the future. Current projections show that investment in the grid is on track to fall about $172 billion short of what is needed through 2030 to meet net zero goals. So we have a huge challenge in front of us, and we welcome the dialogue with the chairman and with staff who are here today. And I want to take a moment to thank staff for being here and participating, because their participation and efforts in all of this dialogue and policy reform is truly the glue that holds us all together. So with that, Chairman Phillips.
Hello, everybody. We'll try that one more time. Good morning. All right, that's what I'm talking about. All right, thank you so much, Stacey, for that introduction. And thank you, Wires, for inviting me to speak to you today, especially Larry. I thank you for the invitation. Before I begin, I just want to apologize once again for not being with you all last fall in October when I was supposed to speak. I think a lot of you know that I had a family emergency that was unexpected. And you know, while it has been a tragic experience since I lost my mother, I will tell you this. It is a stark reminder to me that we are not here but for a finite amount of time. And so if you don't listen to anything else I say today, I want you to take this away. I want you to go home. I want you to make sure that you hug your loved ones a little tighter, that you be a little bit more forgiving, have a little bit more grace with your interactions, and know that you live your life and do your work in a way that would make them proud. That's what I'm trying to do. And so, you know, that was uplifting, right? But I'll tell you this. A lot has changed since I was supposed to be with you all last October. A lot has changed in our industry, and that impacts our industry. You have new leadership. Stacey, my dear friend, who I can tell you is one of the most thoughtful, one of the most thorough, and quite frankly, finest attorneys I've ever had the opportunity to work with. I thank you for your leadership, not just for this event, but for everything that you do in this industry day in and day out. I also have a new role. Once again, I'm chairman of a commission. I'm not just a commissioner. And this is the greatest professional honor I've ever had in my career. Congress is divided again. We have a new leader in the House of Representatives after a couple tries. Elon Musk took over Twitter. We are in the first days of the fusion age, and artificial intelligence continues to spark interesting debate. Now, I have to tell you something. I am fascinated by AI. And raise your hand if you saw the 60 Minutes interview with the Google CEO or you read about it. A few people here. This is not just because I'm fascinated about the implications it might have on our industry and the work that we do. And it's not clear what the outcome will be of that. Right? Let's just state that up front. But it just blows my mind that he said, we don't fully understand it. We don't understand why it lies. Okay. But I'm so intrigued by this technology that I wanted to play with it. I don't have it downloaded on any of my devices at all. And so I did what any self-respecting chairman would do. I found a millennial on our staff and I asked them, I said, can you ask your AI, how do you fix transmission? I have some good news and I have some bad news. The bad news is the answer wasn't all that great. We didn't really learn anything that we didn't already know, okay? But here's the good news. All of our jobs are safe. For now, it takes a human to do this work, to build out our energy grid. It takes sometimes 3 humans to determine what the public interest is for a particular matter or proceeding. And so, for now, y'all can rest easy. But in all seriousness, putting aside jokes about AI, it's not lost on me that I've taken over the chairmanship at a pivotal moment not just in our history and in the energy landscape here in the United States, but around the globe. Let me find my place. So in January, when I had my first open meeting as chairman, I set out what my priorities would be for 2023. And it's not going to be any huge surprises, but I'll tell you what they are. Number 1, reliability. Number 2, transmission reform. And number 3, environmental justice. And as far as I can tell, as Larry said, all of those priorities are represented in the agenda that we have here today at WIRES. I'm also glad to say that in just a few months, we've made considerable progress on all 3 of these. I want to talk about them just for a moment before we get to our Q&A session. I must begin with reliability, because reliability is job number 1. And I include in reliability grid security. We continue to be faced with unprecedented challenges to the reliability of our grid. We continue to see tests to our physical and cybersecurity defenses. Since January, FERC has directed the development of cybersecurity or SIP reliability standards for internal network security monitoring. We have approved SIP reliability standards that will add additional security controls to expand supply chain risk managed practices. And we established incentives for utilities for voluntary investment in cybersecurity tools. Regarding physical security, in February, we held a joint FERC state task force, say that 3 times real fast, but we focused on physical security. We've talked about the impact on the bulk electric system as well as the distribution system with our state colleagues and what solutions we can use and best practices we can use to address those concerns. And just last week, we had Jim Robb, the CEO of NERC, come and present at our open meeting. FERC directed Jim, after those attacks, to come back with a report. We wanted them to review our SIP reliability standards and let us know what can we do to improve them. He identified some opportunities for us to tighten up our physical security standard, and also recommended that we have a technical conference to talk about these issues later in the year. I've directed our team to work with the NERC staff to do that technical conference. Extreme weather continues to stress our grid. In the past few months, we've seen everything from record-setting heat waves out west to crippling winter storms in the east that have caused some outages on our system. So in February, we took the first step of approving 2 new cold weather reliability standards. And I look forward to receiving the results of the recommendations from the joint NERC-FERC Winter Storm Elliott inquiry. That'll happen later this year. But as Stacy said earlier in the introduction, I believe that one of the best ways that we can maintain reliability and resilience is to make sure that we get power from one part of the country where it's generated to where it's needed in another part of the country. And there's only one way we can do that, and that's transmission investment. I know I'm preaching to the choir when I say that investment in transmission is key, but let me tell you what it's key for. It's key for the clean energy transition. It's key for improving resilience during extreme weather events and bringing down high electricity costs over the long term. By the way, you may have seen in the New York Times, it modeled out what they thought our electric system might look like in 2050 if we are to achieve the president's ambitious climate goals. And the article also pointed out, and this is no surprise to anybody here, that if we are to achieve those goals, we're going to have to build a whole lot of transmission. But make no mistake, investments in our transmission, they are also investments in our national security. In today's geopolitical landscape, the benefits of having abundant domestic energy supplies have never been more pronounced. And in order to get the needed transmission projects financed and built, we must address the continuing barriers to regional and interregional transmission investment. The transmission NOPRs and proceedings that we started over the last year, I'm glad to say they are aimed at doing just that. And I want you all to know that I'm committed to working with my colleagues to make sure that we can advance and keep the momentum going on these proceedings so that we can see a real benefit to our transmission investment in the near term. That'll include things like interconnection queue reform. Look, and I know this is the most thrilling speech you've ever heard. I'm going to talk about transmission for a little bit here. But you know, FERC's most recent State of the Markets report highlighted that unprecedented number of resources that are retiring on our system and new resources that are coming in. And it also showed that we have an incredibly bottlenecked interconnection queue system. We also know that in 2023, there are almost 2,000 gigawatts of clean energy resources and storage resources that are waiting to come onto our system. We cannot continue to reliably and affordably manage our energy transition if we continue to have long delays. We know that in 2023, the average project is waiting 5 years in interconnection queue. What's one of those goals? What is it, 2030? The math ain't mathing. We have to do something to fix it. I'm optimistic when I talk to my colleagues about our opportunity to issue a final rule on interconnection queue reform, which will unlock these resources and relieve some of the pressure on the bottlenecks we see around the country. But let me tell you, long interconnection queue delays, it's only a symptom of our maxed out transmission planning process. So we have to talk about transmission planning reform. Our pending transmission planning NOPR would require robust, long-term transmission planning that accounts for a broad set of benefits over a 20-year time horizon. Forward-looking, holistic planning not only helps make sure our system will be reliable, but it also makes good financial sense by encouraging the efficient use of capital and ultimately reducing costs to our consumers. Transparency and cost containment, those are also important issues. So I'm proud to say that our reforms are focused on affordability as well. Interregional transfer capability, as you heard Congressman Clyburn talk about. This is important. I've been talking about this, by the way, since I came to FERC. I think there's probably, in my view, when it comes to reliability, there's no more important reform that we can make than addressing interregional transfer capability. Grid enhancing technologies, this is something that has to be on the table. We have to do all that we can to not just build new infrastructure, but to make sure that we get as much, I call it juice, my staff don't like to say, we get as much juice out of the current system as we can. The last thing I'll mention before I take questions from you all is this: environmental justice. Now, I've been advised by many people, don't make this your issue. Please, not this. Don't make this your issue. But let me tell y'all something. You got the wrong man if you think that I'm not going to make every effort that we can to lift the voices of underserved communities. It's personal to me. I grew up in an environmental justice community. I know what it feels like to live in the shadows of heavy industry. I know what it smells like. We have to be able to build out the system that we need and respect environmental justice system communities at the same time. It's not an issue of can you do it or can you respect EJ communities. We can and we must do both. That's why over the past year, well, past 5 months since I've been chairman, we've made great strides here. We've announced our new senior counsel on environmental justice and equity. Conrad, stand up, let them see. I know you'll be hearing from him a little bit more later. We also had, for the first time at the commission, a roundtable on environmental justice. And if you haven't had a chance to watch this, I've never seen anything like this happen at FERC before. We're also continuing on a case-by-case basis to make sure that we mitigate impacts on communities as we approve projects, as we move forward. We did something last week that the commission has never done before. We required a proponent of a project to mitigate air quality impacts on an EJ communities. So in the past 5 months, I can tell you this, without equivocation or mental reservation, that we've done more to lift the voices of underserved communities than any commission in the history of FERC. Y'all can clap for that. Now look, Ronan and Karen, Ronan's my chief of staff, Karen's one of my senior advisors. One of the last things they told me was that when you go up there, just read the speech. I'm sorry, I'm incapable of doing that. But I can tell you this, it is a thrill to be here with you today. You know, talking to you here is important, but the opportunity that we've had to get together, and we had a chance to break a little bread, and maybe there was a cocktail or two involved last night, that's equally as important. So I just thank you for your time, I thank you for your support, and I thank WIRES for its leadership. Thank you. Here comes the hard part.
Is it on? Oh, yeah, it's on now. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Chairman. Really appreciate your comments and also appreciate your willingness to take questions from the group here. I have to say, words like hallelujah and amen were popping into my mind as I was listening to what you had to say. But we're anxious to just follow up a little bit on some of the points that you raised. As Executive Director of WIRES, I get the privilege of at least leading off and getting to ask a few questions before we turn over to the members of our audience and our attendees here. So you all can start thinking about questions you would like to ask the chairman as well. But one of the topics I wanted to start off with was, we all know there's been we're living in an era of relatively increasing partisanship within our government and within DC. And I think people have sensed that even in the last few years at the commission. But you have talked about the need to work with your colleagues on coming together in agreement on an agenda. I know you've emphasized the importance of bipartisanship personally for you as well as to how things get done. And even in your opening remarks, you not only encouraged us to hug our loved ones, but to focus on grace with interactions. So following up on that theme, I would just like to just get your sense of how have you been working with your colleagues to try to accomplish that? What types of steps have you been taking? And how's it going in terms of working more along bipartisan efforts to get the agenda of the commission moving forward?
Well, thank you, Larry. Thank you for that question. That is an interesting question, and I'll say this. It's not lost on any of you that we are in what we call a divided FERC, right? With 2-2, we have 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. And FERC is a bipartisan commission for a reason. It could have had a single director, but I think Congress intended for us to be bipartisan so that we work together. And I'll tell you why that's important. What you do, if you do it by yourself, can just be undone when there's a new chairman and a new president that comes along. And I think for some of the things that we really value, that really need to happen, that are important, like transmission reform, it's important that we do them in a long-lasting and durable way. And so I think building consensus across the aisle, it's not just something that's an important goal. I think it's necessary. And I really, at this point, I want to applaud my colleagues. Especially I want to call out Commissioner Christie, who has reached out to me again and again. I can't talk about what we talk about in our deliberations, but I can tell you there is a sincere desire to get things done, to move things forward, to not just sit on our hands, but to do the work of the American people, because like I said, we don't have forever to do this. But can I say one more thing, Larry?
Sure.
I think it starts with respect. It starts with respect for your colleagues, to let them know that if you disagree with me, that doesn't make you evil. We're not as far apart. You've heard me say this before. We're not as far apart as our politics might suggest. That when it comes to doing big things like building infrastructure, we can find a way to agree. So, thank you.
Well, great. I want to follow up on another point you had talked about too, and just see if I can flesh it out a little bit more. But we all know that there are numerous studies out there that talk about the need to dramatically increase the size of the grid, whether you're talking about doubling or tripling the grid over the next, say, 2 to 3 decades, just to meet, oh my gosh, resilience needs, electrification needs, clean energy needs. But then as Stacy mentioned, we just got a report that came out from Bloomberg that's saying at the current pace, we're going to fall 178 billion, that's with a B, short on our investment in transmission between now and 2030, right? So what are your thoughts on how do we get the level of investment from where we're at now up to that point where we can actually build out and accomplish that kind of a growth in transmission build out of the grid?
I think one of the most significant things that has happened in our industry in the past year, probably the past decade, has been recent legislation on this very point. I think the IRA, the Infrastructure Act, the funding that's included, the teeth behind these policy positions, it's going to drastically change the landscape. I think it's going to do a lot to spur investment in transmission. I think when it comes to what FERC can do, not to sound like a broken record, I mean, I think we have to make sure that we double down and follow through on our commitment regarding transmission reform. We have to send the right signals to investors to let them know that we're going to do everything we can to speed this process up. People, I say this all the time, when we talk about these projects, it's real money. You know, you guys, I want you to do the right thing, but it's not a charity. You're trying to make money too. And I recognize that. I'll say this too. It's also real jobs. You know, like I mentioned, I grew up blue-collar community, people who worked jobs in this industry, construction jobs. They worked offshore on rigs. I'm from the Gulf Coast. This real opportunity to change the lives of people who live in communities, it can't be missed. And so I think if you let people know from a FERC perspective that you're doing all that you can to make sure that the pathway will be clear, I think you'll see more people come to the table.
Well, thank you for that. That's a critical component of the benefits associated with transmission investment, which is the broader impacts. You know, the impacts on the community, the investment in jobs, and like we call family supporting, good paying jobs as well. So, and then I'm just going to follow up with one more because I could keep going on for a while here. But kind of a similar theme along this about the need for additional investment and build out of the grid. You know our members are committed to doing their part to try to accomplish that build out and to do it in a way that is efficient and cost effective. But this question of cost is a big part of what's going on in the equation on it. And as the commission is looking at different ways of how you can focus on the concerns around costs, how do you balance those two things, the need to promote and invest a significant sum of money in the grid with keeping costs contained or lower?
You've touched on, I believe, really the gravamen of the complaint here, right? Somebody's got to pay for this. I always tell you, I'm going to tell you the truth when you ask me a question. And in the near term, there are going to be more costs to upgrade our system, right? But this is a near term and a long term proposition. I think there are lots of studies that also say that if you invest in our infrastructure, you will see costs come down for customers over the long term. I think that's important. We also know that we have some aging infrastructure right now. I mean, some of this stuff is, way older than I am, 60, 70-year-old infrastructure and up, right? So we're going to have to replace this infrastructure at some point. What I recommend is that we be thoughtful, that we be strategic and do this in a way that is efficient, that is sustainable. I think a big part of doing this too is not just building everything that we can. I said something about this a little while ago. I think that there's an opportunity for us to use new technology, grid enhancing technology like advanced reconductoring, make sure that we're not just, we can replace the existing lines that are on some of these systems that will give us more capacity on the line and also at a much lower cost than rebuilding it. I think we've issued rules which I've supported, ambient line ratings, other types of tools. I'm drawing a blank right now. But these are the things that I think we have to invest in to make sure that we're doing this with cost in mind. I like to say that if we cannot do this affordably, we will not do it successfully.
Well, I'm going to reluctantly yield my time to the attendees here and see if anybody else has questions they would like to ask of you. So.
Mr. Chairman, right over here, Davis Strobridge with ITC. Thanks for being here. So I had a chance to attend the EJ panel, and powerful. Allegedly, I had a tear in my eye. Very, very powerful. But we've been thinking a lot as a transmission-only company about where does transmission fit into this EJ equation? And a lot of the panel was focused on fossil siting in your region where you're from. So where do you see transmission fitting into the environmental justice discussion?
That's an excellent question. We actually, Congress directed us in the Infrastructure Act to address backstop siting authority, which is something that has had several versions over the years. And back in December, we issued our proposed rule to implement that. Included in that modification of Section 216 of the Federal Power Act, we talk about environmental justice communities, and we talk about really what we would like to see in the transmission development process. And really the crux of this is that we want to make sure that transmission operators and developers have an engagement plan to make sure that we have the data to understand what it takes to mitigate any impacts, potential impacts that we might have on environmental justice communities. Those are the kinds of things that we need to think about. But whether it be in transmission or whether it be in gas pipelines, when we talk about it there, I think what we have to do is make sure that we have the voices of underserved communities at the table and that they're heard in a meaningful way every step of the way. And this is what I say. Each one of you has the opportunity to impact what your company does. And just do this. Do this for me. Treat the people in the pathway of the work that you're going to do as if they're your own family. If you just do that, I think we'll go a long way to solving this problem. Thank you for the question.
Hi, Chairman. Stuart Nachmias from Con Edison Transmission. Again, thank you for being here. I think your introductory remarks and your priorities are really significant, and particularly, as we build out more transmission, that could also, as you point out, ease the interconnection queues and provide headroom, because a lot of the delays are the length of time it takes to study system impacts. And then building on something Larry said, costs of the projects are really key, but I wanted to focus a little bit on risks of projects, because what we see, particularly with projects that are cost contained, there are a lot of delays in projects, in siting, supply chain issues that are coming up, and it adds a tremendous amount of risk. And I'm curious to know certainly how the FERC is thinking about mitigating those kind of risks, and what kind of tools, or are there additional tools or new tools that we need to think through to really facilitate the development of these projects in a way that would be fair and balanced?
Thank you for the question. This is one of the reasons why I made environmental justice one of my priorities. I think what we've seen often cases, especially on the gas side, but I think as we build out, we triple, Larry says we're going to triple our capacity on our system, I think we're going to have more impacts. And so the one thing that we can do to limit the risk to our system is we address the concerns on the front end of a project. If we engage with communities on the front end, and I think what we can do is avoid costly delays on the back end and litigation on the back end. And let me tell you what I mean a little bit by it. I'm talking about landowners. I'm talking about tribal communities. These are the types of issues that we have to grapple with to make sure that you clear those out early on. And I think that that's just not the right thing to do. I think it's good for business as well. I think the same approach can be taken to addressing our supply chain. We have real issues and concerns. I know we have long backlogs on things like, transformers, issues like that. These are things that we're focused on and we're talking about on the federal level. I think that goes to reliability. It goes to resilience. So I think we need an all-of-government approach. It's something that I talk to my colleagues about quite a bit. And so we're talking about this, we're thinking about this, and my concerns are the same as your concerns. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Phillips. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Viet No with PCEG. You mentioned that it's important to provide proper signals to investors in connection with the need to expand the transmission systems. One question I have is that regulatory certainty is really a necessary component of that in terms of sending the proper signals. And for many years, transmission has been constructed based on incentives that the Commission provided back in 2006 under Order 679. But in recent years, and some of this is predated your becoming chairman, there have been some suggestions of rolling back to some of those incentives or reversing them. And certainly I think that doesn't send the right signals in terms of certainty. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts on that issue is in terms of regulatory certainty to encourage new transmission.
You know, it's interesting. I've heard the same calls that you've heard. It's no secret. I've been pretty vocal in my support. I think we continue to approve incentives for transmission now, and I think there's an opportunity for us to continue to do so. I think, you know, we talked about some of that bipartisanship and working with our colleagues. I think it's going to take a little effort to get us there. But if we're going to meet our goals, we cannot do it with one hand tied behind our back. Every tool has to be on the table. And I can just tell you, I'm not going to come to a wires conference and say I'm going to take away incentives. I'm not going to let that be the headline. But it's not just that. We just did incentives for cybersecurity investment. And so I think with the right leadership, with the right opportunities, we can still find a way to incent the behavior that we want to have. And clearly, whether you think that investment in transmission is good for the clean energy transition, or you think it's good for grid security and reliability, we all agree that we need to build more transmission. And so we have to use every tool in our tool belt. Thank you for the question. And good to see you, by the way.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. Nina with ITC. Good to see you. My question was this. I know that you're focused on interregional transfer capability, resource adequacy. Can you talk about how you view interregional transmission fitting into that discussion?
Yes. I know that in order number 1,000, you know, it was a goal to actually spur more investment in interregional transport. I think it created a bit of a perverse incentive for people to just check the box, and we had regions would have these long processes, and they'd say, we consulted, and we did what we were supposed to do, and oh, we can't do it. I think what we're trying to do, what I'm focused on doing, is actually putting real teeth to actually see, not just have them approved, but actually have interregional transfer projects built. I think it's so critically important. You don't have to look any further than Winter Storm Elliott or Winter Storm Uri. It can literally be an issue, a matter of life and death. And this is the greatest opportunity that we've had. If we can solve this problem, if we can address interconnection queue reform, if we can address interregional transfer capability, it will be the most expansive reform in transmission in a generation. And we're here with the 2-2 commission, and we're right at the doorstep of doing that. What a great opportunity we have. Great opportunity. Thank you. Good to see you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Josh Raleigh with MYR Group. I'll ask it pretty plainly. So what are your solution or your solutions for interconnection queue reform? You talked about there being a major bottleneck. What are some of those ideas or solutions that you've been discussing? Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think some of them, most of them you've seen in our NOPR, our proposed rule. You can look to some of the regions around the country. They haven't waited for us. I mean, I think, our process takes a little bit of time, and we're seeing what we proposed in the NOPR reflected in some of the proposals in front of us. I think moving from a serial, first come, first served approach in the queue to a first ready, first served approach, the clustered approach we've seen in California and other places, I think there's a real opportunity for us there. I think having more skin in the game, quite frankly, for some prospective projects that just sort of take up space in the queue, I think there's an opportunity there as well. I got Karen in the back here. She's my senior counsel on transmission. She's briefed me on this like 6 times. You'd think I'd have it down. But those are the types of reforms that I think can get the biggest bang for our buck. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again for joining us. Jamie Simler with Ameren. So I appreciate all the positive comments and on transmission build out, and I want to kind of take us in a little bit different direction. I was going to ask you about if you would share your views on RTOs. You know, they are being asked to do more and more through a lot of the rulemakings that the Commission issues. And so I just wanted to see your thoughts on how they're standing up to the challenge and what you think more broadly about RTO participation and policy. Thank you.
Thank you. That is a very timely and relevant question. I think you probably have noticed that we've had a lot of activity on our docket. We're going to have a forum regarding the capacity markets and PJM. We're going to have the second forum on resource adequacy issues in New England. Both of these forums are going to take place in June. Let me say this, taking a step back. For RTOs and ISOs, when they work, they have tremendous value to our system. I think when you hear people complain, they're mostly complaining about things like capacity markets. You don't hear people complain about stuff like the diversity in resources that RTOs have brought onto the system. I think independent market monitors is a great invention regarding the transparency that we plan and operate our system. I think there are efficiencies that we've seen over the past 20 to 25 years that, quite frankly, we wouldn't have. Reliability, I would argue, has been improved by RTOs and ISOs. So I think there's great value to it. There's no perfect system. I think we've seen some of these cracks at the seams, and we've tried to address those. You know, some people, they have a lot to say about what we do to address them. That's okay. That's okay. I can take the arrows, but I'm going to tell you something. When we have an outcome that is inequitable, you're talking about a person who will always do what I think is the right thing to make sure that we have a just and reasonable outcome. That's what we're talking about. That's what I'm focused on. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you so much for the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. James Amato with Burns & McDonnell. You mentioned a little bit about the gridlock situation of a 2-2 team, and you're both engaged in rigorous debate on these issues. Can you take us as much as you can to kind of 2 points? One, where do you think you're closest in line and alignment with each other where you could actually get something done that you'll be proud of? And conversely, where are you the furthest apart?
I've never been asked that question. I think that if you look at our voting record, 95% of the time our decisions are unanimous. And that's not just under my leadership. That's been the case, I believe, in recent history at FERC. We may be a little higher than that right now. But I think that on most things, we agree. The one thing I can say that I'm engaging all my colleagues on right now is interconnection queue reform. I think that there's a great opportunity for us to do something that is bipartisan, for us to do something that has consensus, a real true chance for us to have something that's lasting on interconnection queue reform. Where we're furthest apart. I mean, I think they're the issues that we've been talking about today. Some of the issues we've been talking about today. I think reforms to our markets, that's something that is just challenging and difficult. It's going to take a lot of work for us to make sure that we get that right, but I think we're all interested in doing it. You know, I think that we all have different opinions, but ultimately, I think we're all going to be able to come together and do the right thing. Thank you for the question.
Well, we're actually getting a little bit close towards the end here, folks, so I think we're going to probably move towards wrapping it up. Chairman, you can tell that this is a very shy and reticent group. But we're also a group that I think, because these issues are so complex and they are so critical and so important to the nation, we're anxious to engage with the Commission, help formulate the solutions to some of these challenges. As we get towards the end of this portion of the session, I guess I would like your advice or your thoughts for us as to how we as transmission owners and those who represent them can engage most effectively with you and your colleagues. You've been as both a commissioner now and as a chairman. What can we do to help the commission move forward on these issues, answer questions, and provide support that could be beneficial to you in the decision-making process.
You know, people, I used to work in politics a long time ago. People say, you know, vote early and often. I mean, I think communication early and often is the best thing you can do. Comment. I know that it's been a lot of activity from FERC, and we're all exhausted. I've tried to moderate that a little bit to sort of bring things down to a pace that's digestible. But we desperately need for you to put your thoughts on paper, to put them in front of us. And a big part of that, Larry, is coming to us and talking to us before something is a formal proceeding. I've met with many of you in this room many times. I welcome that interaction. Pre-filing meetings are really important. And utilize the staff. You know, I want to get out and do this as much as I can, so I'm not always in DC. But there's no daylight between me and my team, so please, by all means, take meetings with staff. I'm gonna be honest with you, they probably know more about what's happening than some of us do. And so that's really, really important. That would be my advice. Yeah.
Well, great. As you can see by how many hands went up, and I had to cut off, we could go on for hours probably on this, but I know we want to be respectful of your time. And we appreciate your coming here, spending this time with us today, your frankness and your candor with respect to your responses. I also want to echo something Stacy said. I really want to express my appreciation to your staff for coming here as well. We really appreciate the opportunity to interact not just with you, but with your staff as well. And we realize what kind of a sacrifice it is out of your schedule to come here and spend this much time with us today. I know you've got a couple things on your radar screen coming up with Senate E&R down the road, so I know how much the value of taking your time out to come here and be with us today. So please join me in thanking the chairman for being here and all the